Two P-51 Mustangs, literally bolted together, wings connected by a shared center section, two fuselages flying side by side, two pilots sitting just 15 feet apart from each other. When engineers at North American Aviation proposed this design in 1943, many thought they'd lost their minds. But the U.S. Army Air Forces had a problem that conventional fighters couldn't solve, and this bizarre twin fuselage monster was the answer. The problem was simple but brutal: range. American bombers were flying missions deep into Japan that lasted 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours. Fighter escorts like the P-51 Mustang could barely make it halfway before running out of fuel and turning back. Pilots needed relief, someone to take over the controls while they rested, but single-seat fighters meant one pilot had to stay alert for the entire mission. Fatigue was killing pilots almost as effectively as Japanese fighters. The solution seemed insane. Take two P-51 fuselages, connect them with a common wing and tail section, put a pilot in each cockpit so they could trade off flying duties, stuff the thing with fuel tanks, and create a fighter with the range of a bomber. The result was the F-82 Twin Mustang, a fighter that could escort bombers all the way to Tokyo and back, with two pilots who could spell each other during the mission. But it became something far more than a long-range escort. The twin fuselage design created space for radar equipment that single-seat fighters couldn't carry. The second cockpit meant you could put a dedicated radar operator alongside the pilot, creating America's first true night fighter with intercept capability. Those two fuselages provided redundancy. If one engine failed, the other could get you home. And the sheer size of this monster, with its 80-foot wingspan and devastating firepower, made it a weapon that terrified enemies who encountered it. By the time the first F-82s reached operational units in 1946, World War II had ended. Many assumed this strange twin fighter would never see combat. They were wrong. When North Korea invaded South Korea in June 1950, F-82 Twin Mustangs scored the first aerial victories of the Korean War. They flew the longest fighter missions in history. They hunted enemy aircraft through pitch-black nights using radar that no other American fighter possessed. And they proved that sometimes the craziest ideas create the most capable weapons. This is the story of why America bolted two P-51 Mustangs together, and how that decision created a monster that dominated the skies in ways its designers never anticipated. By 1943, the air war over Europe and the Pacific had revealed a critical weakness in American strategic bombing. B-17s and B-24s could reach distant targets and deliver devastating bomb loads, but they needed fighter protection. Without escorts, German and Japanese fighters slaughtered bomber formations. The problem was that fighters had far less range than bombers. The P-51 Mustang had been a revelation when it entered service. Its efficient aerodynamics and internal fuel capacity gave it better range than earlier escorts like the P-47 Thunderbolt. Drop tanks extended that range further, but even the Mustang couldn't stay with bombers all the way to targets deep in Germany or Japan. Fighters had to turn back, leaving bombers vulnerable for portions of their missions. More insidious was pilot fatigue. Flying a high-performance fighter in combat conditions required constant attention. Scanning for enemy aircraft, monitoring instruments, maintaining formation, managing fuel, it all demanded intense concentration. Missions lasting 4 or 5 hours left pilots exhausted. 8 or 10-hour missions, like those required for escort to Japan, exceeded human endurance. Pilots fatigued made mistakes. They missed threats. They couldn't react quickly in combat. Some fell asleep at the controls. The Army Air Forces explored various solutions. Larger drop tanks helped, but created drag that reduced performance. Some proposals suggested flying bombers more slowly to conserve fighter fuel, unacceptable because it made bombers even more vulnerable. Others proposed developing entirely new long-range fighters, but that required years of development time that the war effort couldn't afford. Then someone at North American Aviation had an audacious idea. What if you took two P-51 fuselages and connected them? Each fuselage would have a pilot and an engine. The pilots could trade off flying duties, with one resting while the other controlled the aircraft. The twin-engine configuration would provide redundancy and allow for more fuel capacity, and you could build it quickly using existing P-51 components rather than designing an entirely new aircraft. Edgar Schmood, North American's chief designer who had created the original P-51, took charge of the project. His team began working out how to make this concept actually fly. The engineering challenges were substantial. How do you connect two fuselages without creating an ungainly, unflyable aircraft? How do you synchronize two engines to prevent control problems? How do you balance the aircraft if one engine fails? The solution was elegant in its simplicity. The two fuselages were positioned about 12 feet apart, connected by a constant chord center wing section that provided tremendous structural strength. The outer wing panels were slightly longer than standard P-51 wings, giving the aircraft an 80-foot wingspan, wider than a B-25 Mitchell bomber. A single horizontal stabilizer connected the two vertical tails, creating a stable platform. The cockpits mirrored each other, with duplicate controls so either pilot could fly the aircraft. In normal operation, one pilot would handle flying duties while the other monitored systems, navigation, and watched for threats. They could switch roles whenever needed, allowing both pilots to remain relatively fresh during marathon missions. On April 15, 1945, the XP-82 prototype made its first flight. Test pilot Joe Barton reported that the aircraft handled surprisingly well despite its unusual configuration. It flew like a larger, heavier P-51, stable and responsive. The twin engines provided enormous power, and the aircraft could actually fly on a single engine, though with reduced performance.
While the prototype was flying, World War II was ending. Germany surrendered in May 1945, and Japan followed in August after the atomic bombings. The immediate need for ultra-long-range escorts disappeared. Many experimental programs were canceled as the military demobilized. The Twin Mustang might have been scrapped, except for one crucial capability that had emerged during development. The aircraft's size and twin cockpit configuration made it perfect as a night fighter. The U.S. had struggled with night interception throughout the war. German night fighters using radar had devastated RAF bomber streams. American forces needed equivalent capability, but lacked a suitable platform. Existing night fighters, like the P-61 Black Widow, were large, twin-engine aircraft with limited performance. The F-82, redesigned from P-82 when the Air Force became independent, could carry sophisticated radar equipment in a centerline pod while maintaining fighter-level performance. One pilot would fly the aircraft, while the radar operator in the second cockpit managed the intercept radar and guided the pilot to targets. This created a true night interceptor with the speed and maneuverability to catch enemy aircraft. North American developed the F-82F and F-82G models specifically for the night fighter role. These variants featured AN/APG-28 radar in a pod beneath the center wing section. The radar had a range of about 5 miles and could detect aircraft at various altitudes. For 1946 technology, this was sophisticated equipment that gave the F-82 genuine all-weather intercept capability. The aircraft's armament was devastating. 6.50 caliber machine guns were concentrated in a pod on the center wing section, positioned directly beneath the pilot's line of sight. Some variants added additional guns or rocket racks under the outer wings. This firepower, combined with the speed to catch enemy aircraft and radar to find them in darkness, created a formidable night hunter. But there was a problem: engines. The prototype had used Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same engines that powered the P-51. By 1946, Packard was shutting down Merlin production, and the engines weren't available in sufficient quantities. North American switched to Allison V1710 engines for production aircraft, the same engines used in earlier P-51 variants before the Merlin upgrade. This created an unusual situation. The left and right engines rotated in opposite directions, counter-rotating propellers to balance torque effects. This meant the engines weren't identical. One was essentially a mirror image of the other. Maintenance crews had to stock different parts for left and right engines, but the counter-rotating props eliminated the torque roll that affected single-engine fighters, making the F-82 more stable and easier to fly. Production began in 1946, with the Air Force ordering several hundred aircraft in different variants. The F-82E was configured for long-range escort duties. The F-82F and F-82G were night fighters with radar. The F-82H was a cold-weather variant with additional heating and different equipment for operations in Alaska. In total, about 270 F-82s were built, a small production run that reflected post-war budget constraints. Pilots transitioning to the F-82 discovered an aircraft unlike anything they'd flown. Simply walking up to it was intimidating. The thing was enormous. That 80-foot wingspan exceeded many bombers. Standing beneath the center section, you could see both fuselages stretching away to either side, each with its own cockpit, each with an engine that produced 1,600 horsepower. Climbing into the cockpit revealed familiar P-51 instrumentation and controls, but with a crucial difference. You could look right and see your co-pilot sitting in an identical cockpit just 15 feet away. Communication was typically through the intercom, though pilots could see each other and use hand signals if needed. Starting the engines required coordination. Each engine had to be primed and started separately. The massive propellers, over 12 feet in diameter, rotated in opposite directions. Once both engines were running, pilots had to synchronize the throttles carefully to prevent asymmetric thrust that would cause control problems. Taxiing presented unique challenges. The aircraft's width meant ground crews had to guide pilots carefully to avoid wingtips striking obstacles. The view forward was excellent, much better than the P-51's notorious long nose, but the sheer size of the aircraft required constant attention during ground operations. Takeoff was straightforward but dramatic. With 3,200 combined horsepower pushing a relatively light airframe, the F-82 accelerated rapidly. The counter-rotating props meant no torque correction was needed. The aircraft tracked straight down the runway. Rotation speed was higher than a single P-51, but once airborne, the Twin Mustang climbed strongly. In flight, pilots reported that the aircraft handled remarkably well despite its size. It wasn't as nimble as a single-seat fighter, but it was far more maneuverable than any twin-engine aircraft had a right to be. The controls were responsive, and the aircraft remained stable across its speed range. At high speeds, it could dive and turn with surprising agility. The redundancy of twin engines provided enormous peace of mind. Engine failures that would doom a single-engine fighter over water or enemy territory became manageable emergencies in the F-82. The aircraft could fly on one engine, though with reduced performance and increased fuel consumption. Pilots practiced single-engine operations extensively, learning to compensate for the asymmetric thrust. Range was genuinely impressive. With internal fuel and drop tanks, the F-82 could fly missions exceeding 2,000 miles, enough to escort bombers deep into enemy territory and return. This exceeded any single-seat fighter's capability and fulfilled the original design requirement for ultra-long-range escort. The pilot rotation system worked well. During long missions, pilots would trade off every hour or two. The pilot not flying would monitor instruments, handle navigation, watch for threats, and manage radios. This dramatically reduced fatigue compared to single-pilot operations. Pilots arriving after 8-hour missions reported feeling far less exhausted than after much shorter flights in single-seat fighters. Night operations revealed the F-82's true value. The radar operator would scan his scope, detecting targets invisible to the naked eye. He'd guide the pilot through radio instructions: turn left 10 degrees, target at 2 o'clock, 3 miles, closing. The pilot concentrated on flying smoothly, while the radar operator managed the intercept radar. When visual contact was established, either by seeing the target against clouds or stars, the pilot took over for the attack. The 6.50 caliber guns delivered devastating firepower. Concentrated in the center pod, they converged on a single point about 1,000 feet ahead of the aircraft. A 2-second burst sent over 100 rounds downrange. Against aircraft, this was usually more than sufficient. The gun's position on the center line meant no convergence issues or concerns about firing through the propeller arc. With World War II over, the F-22 had to justify its existence in peacetime. Budget pressures and force reductions threatened many programs. The Twin Mustang survived because it fulfilled roles that no other aircraft could match: long-range escort, night fighting, and all-weather interception. In February 1947, an F-82B set a distance record that demonstrated the aircraft's remarkable range capability. Colonel Robert Thacker and Lieutenant John Ard flew non-stop from Hawaii to New York, a distance of 5,051 miles, in just over 14 hours. They called their aircraft Betty Joe, after Thacker's wife. The flight required careful fuel management and navigation across the vast Pacific, but the F-82 completed it without difficulty, proving the twin-engine design's endurance. This wasn't a stunt. It was a practical demonstration that fighters could now deploy across oceanic distances without requiring carrier transport or staging through multiple bases. The F-82 could fly from Alaska to Japan, or from bases in the United States to Europe, providing rapid deployment capability that had previously required weeks of coordination. The Air Force assigned F-82s to Air Defense Command for protecting the continental United States and to Far East Air Forces for operations in Japan and the Pacific. The night fighter variants, F-82Fs and F-82Gs, equipped squadrons responsible for defending against potential Soviet bomber attacks. During the early Cold War, these units maintained alert status, ready to launch and intercept intruders. Alaska received special attention. The F-82H winterized variant deployed to bases in America's Arctic territory, defending against Soviet aircraft that might approach over the North Pole. The twin-engine reliability was crucial in this environment, where engine failures over frozen wasteland meant almost certain death. Pilots appreciated having two engines when flying over terrain offering no emergency landing options. Far East Air Forces operated F-82s from bases in Japan, conducting training missions and maintaining readiness. These units didn't expect to see combat. The assumption was that America's next war would involve strategic bombing with nuclear weapons, not conventional air combat. The F-82s provided air defense and occasional reconnaissance missions in what seemed like a peacetime backwater assignment. Then, on June 25, 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. The peacetime military suddenly found itself fighting a major war, and the F-82 Twin Mustang was about to prove its worth in combat. When North Korea invaded, American forces in the region were unprepared for major combat operations. The occupation forces in Japan had focused on peacekeeping and training, not combat readiness. But they were what America had available, and they went into action immediately. The 68th Fighter Squadron All-Weather and 339th Fighter Squadron All-Weather, both equipped with F-82G night fighters, were among the first units committed to combat. These squadrons had been flying routine air defense missions from Japanese bases. Now they received orders to deploy to Korea and engage North Korean aircraft. On June 27, 1950, just 2 days after the invasion began, the F-82 scored its first kill and became the first American aircraft to shoot down an enemy plane in the Korean War. Lieutenant William Hudson and his radar operator Lieutenant Carl Fraser were flying a night patrol when Fraser detected aircraft on radar. Hudson maneuvered for an intercept and spotted North Korean Il-10 ground attack aircraft. He closed to firing range and opened fire, destroying one Il-10 and becoming the first American pilot to score an aerial victory in Korea. That same day, Lieutenant Charles Moran and his radar operator Lieutenant Fred Larkins shot down a North Korean Yak-11 trainer. Other F-82s engaged North Korean aircraft throughout the day, establishing air superiority over the battlefield. The Twin Mustang's combination of speed, range, and radar-guided capability proved invaluable during the chaotic opening days of the war.
The F-82s flew every mission the Air Force needed. Ground attack sorties targeted North Korean armor and supply columns. Combat air patrols protected American forces and hunted enemy aircraft. Night interdiction missions struck targets that were invisible to day fighters. The aircraft's ruggedness proved crucial. F-82s absorbed battle damage and returned to base when single-engine fighters would have been lost. One aircraft returned with over 100 holes from anti-aircraft fire, one engine damaged and barely running, but made it back safely because the second engine provided enough power to reach friendly territory. The pilots credited the twin-engine design with saving their lives. Maintenance crews worked around the clock, keeping F-82s flying. The counter-rotating engines created parts supply challenges. You needed different components for left and right engines. But crews adapted, and the Allison engines proved reliable despite the demanding operating conditions. Aircraft that might have been grounded for engine problems in single-engine fighters kept flying because they had a backup power plant. As summer turned to fall, the character of the air war changed. North Korean air power had been largely destroyed in the opening months. Chinese intervention in November brought MiG-15 jets into the war, and the F-82's days as an air superiority fighter were numbered. The straight-wing, piston-engine Twin Mustang couldn't compete with swept-wing jets in high-altitude dogfights. But the F-82 found a new role: ground attack and night interdiction. The aircraft's long-range, heavy payload capacity and ability to operate in all weather made it valuable for striking targets deep in North Korea. Twin Mustangs bombed supply depots, strafed truck convoys, and attacked North Korean forces with rockets and bombs.
By 1952, the F-82 was being phased out of combat operations. Jet fighters had taken over most missions, and the Twin Mustang's piston engines and straight wings marked it as obsolete. But some squadrons continued flying the aircraft in specialized roles where its unique capabilities remained valuable. Long-range reconnaissance missions utilized the F-82's endurance. Photo reconnaissance variants conducted missions deep into North Korea, photographing targets and assessing bomb damage. The twin-pilot configuration meant the non-flying pilot could operate cameras and navigation equipment, while the flying pilot concentrated on avoiding anti-aircraft fire. Weather reconnaissance became another niche role. F-82s flew into storms and frontal systems, gathering meteorological data that helped planners determine whether mission conditions were acceptable. This was dangerous work, flying through severe turbulence and reduced visibility. But the twin-engine reliability made it safer than single-engine alternatives. Some F-82s flew Firefly missions, night harassment attacks that kept North Korean forces awake and disrupted supply movements. These aircraft would orbit over enemy territory, dropping bombs and firing at targets of opportunity. The psychological effect was significant. North Korean forces never knew when a Twin Mustang might appear overhead. The final F-82 combat missions occurred in early 1953, shortly before the armistice. By then, most Twin Mustangs had been replaced by F-94 Starfire jets and other modern aircraft. The last operational F-82 units returned to the United States, and the aircraft was retired from frontline service. In total, F-82s flew thousands of combat sorties during the Korean War. They destroyed numerous enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat, attacked countless ground targets, and performed missions that no other American aircraft could accomplish during the war's opening months. The official tally showed at least 20 confirmed aerial victories by F-82 crews, though the actual number was likely higher due to incomplete records during the chaotic early fighting. Several F-82 pilots became aces, achieving 5 or more aerial victories while flying the Twin Mustang before transitioning to jets. These pilots praised the aircraft's capabilities, particularly its range and the advantage of having a second crew member to share the workload during intense combat operations. The F-82 Twin Mustang represents one of aviation's most unusual success stories. What began as a seemingly crazy idea, bolting 2 fighters together, became a capable combat aircraft that served effectively in roles its designers never anticipated. The original requirement for ultra-long-range escort was never actually fulfilled in combat. By the time F-82s were operational, World War II had ended, and the strategic bombing missions requiring such escorts no longer existed. But the aircraft found its purpose in other roles: night fighting, all-weather interception, ground attack, and reconnaissance. The twin fuselage design proved surprisingly practical despite its unconventional appearance. Pilots reported that the aircraft handled well, mechanics found it maintainable, and the redundancy of twin engines provided real safety benefits. The counter-rotating propellers eliminated torque issues that plagued single-engine fighters. The second cockpit allowed for crew specialization that improved mission effectiveness. From an engineering perspective, the F-82 validated the concept of creating new capabilities by combining existing components. North American aviation essentially created a new aircraft using proven P-51 technology, reducing development time and risk. This approach wouldn't work for every application, but for the specific requirements the F-82 addressed, it was brilliant. The aircraft's combat record in Korea demonstrated that piston-engine fighters still had value in the early jet age, particularly for missions that required long endurance, heavy payload capacity, or operations from austere bases. While jets dominated air-to-air combat, the F-82 proved effective in roles where jets of that era had limitations. Only about 270 F-82s were built, making it a relatively rare aircraft. Production ended in 1948 as the Air Force transitioned to jet fighters. Most were scrapped after retirement, and only a handful survive in museums today. These museum aircraft look strange even now. That twin fuselage configuration seems like something from an alternate history where aircraft development took a different path. But for the pilots who flew it and the ground crews who maintained it, the F-82 Twin Mustang was simply an effective tool that did its job under demanding conditions. It scored the first aerial victories of the Korean War. It protected the fleet and ground forces. It flew missions lasting 8 hours or more. It brought its crews home safely when single-engine fighters would have left them stranded or dead. The F-82 proved that sometimes the best solution to a difficult problem isn't the most elegant or conventional. It's the one that works. Bolting two P-51 Mustangs together seemed absurd until you considered what it accomplished. Then, it seemed obvious. That's engineering at its finest. Solving problems with creativity and pragmatism rather than adherence to preconceived notions about what an aircraft should look like. The Twin Mustang's legacy extends beyond its own service life. It demonstrated concepts that influence later aircraft development: the value of crew cooperation in complex missions, the importance of redundancy for safety, and the possibility of creating specialized variants for different roles. Modern aircraft like the F-15E Strike Eagle, with its pilot and weapons systems officer working together in a two-seat configuration, owe something to the lessons learned from aircraft like the F-82. So why did America bolt two P-51 Mustangs together? Because they needed range, they needed crew endurance, they needed radar capability, and they needed it all faster than designing an entirely new aircraft would allow. The solution was unconventional, even bizarre, but it worked. It created a monster that dominated night skies over Korea, set distance records, and proved that sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that change everything.